Tensions mount on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. Dozens of Palestinians are injured in confrontations with Israeli police. Could the violence escalate? And how should Israeli and Palestinian leaders respond? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. The Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is holy to Muslims, Jews, and Christians. With Ramadan, Passover, and Easter taking place at the same time this year, tensions are running particularly high in occupied East Jerusalem. On Sunday, Israeli police forcibly dispersed Palestinian worshippers who set up barricades to prevent ultra-right-wing Jewish groups from entering. Palestinians see such visits as provocations. Some were arrested. Paramedics say they were blocked from helping the injured. Jews are forbidden from praying or performing rituals at the compound. But ultra-nationalist groups want to change this. Natasha Ghanem explains from occupied East Jerusalem.
Well, the 545 Jewish visitors who came to the Al-Aqsa compound during their designated 3-hour visit today have left the compound, as has the Israeli police. But earlier, 20 people were injured. 5 of them were taken to the hospital, and a total of 18 people, according to the Israeli police, have been arrested, 4 of them for vandalizing the buses carrying the Jewish visitors. The Israeli police say that early this morning they went inside the compound because, quote, Palestinian rioters were amassing rocks and stones and creating or attempting to create barricades that would have prevented the Jewish visitors from accessing the compound through the designated gate. The Israelis actually have a key and do restrict access to that specific gate. But the police stress at no time during this tense period were Muslims not allowed to continue worshiping. A note about the people who are inside. We saw men, women, boys and girls. These are Jews who are settlers, who are members of ultra-nationalist and Zionist groups. They believe that they have the right to pray on the site. The Temple Mount, a holy site for Jews, is also within the Al-Aqsa compound. And in recent years, this group, once on the fringes, has been growing in numbers, has become more vocal, and has even gained the backing of several Israeli politicians. But for now, again, they are only allowed to go inside the compound and wander around. They are not allowed to pray.
Some of the most volatile periods in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have centered around the man-made hill in occupied East Jerusalem's Old City. Muslims call it the Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary, because it contains 2 of Islam's holiest places, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. Jews call the hill the Temple Mount and revere the area at its base, known as the Western Wall. With so many important religious sites in a small space, the situation around the hill is often tense. Any change to the status quo or a threat to one of the holy sites can quickly lead to unrest. Last year, violence in the compound triggered missile attacks from Gaza into Israel, followed by 11 days of Israeli bombardment on the Gaza Strip. That killed hundreds of people. The Al-Aqsa tensions add to rising violence between Palestinians and Israelis. Since March 22nd, Palestinian attacks in Israeli cities have killed at least 14 people. Israeli forces responded with more raids, shootings, and arrests in the occupied West Bank. At least 16 Palestinians have died. All right, let's bring in our guests. In occupied East Jerusalem, Ziad AbuZayyad, lawyer and political analyst. In Ra'anana in Israel, Nimrod Novik, former senior policy advisor to former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres. And in Doha, Al-Azm, professor of Middle East history and anthropology at Shawnee State University. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Ziad, let me start with you today. How far might we see the violence escalate?
Well, I think it depends on the Israeli government. And the current Israeli government is taken hostage by the right wing. And they are trying to change the status quo in Al-Haram al-Sharif and allowing the Jewish fanatics to go to the courtyards of the mosque. And yesterday, on Friday, there was a violent attack even inside the built mosque, Masjid al-Qibli. So if the Israeli government continue these actions, I'm afraid that it will not stop by where it is now, but things will escalate to more violence. And this is something which all of us should not seek and should not try to get to.
Nimrod, are you concerned that this is going to get worse?
Yes, of course. I mean, I lived through previous moments of tension that escalated and got out of control just a year ago. We all experienced 11 days of terrible violence. So yes, I'm afraid that the extremists on both sides are feeding on each other, and that even a government that I think has been conducting itself quite carefully and learned lessons from previous occasions, even that might not be enough.
Ahmed, I just want to take a step back. Why are things so contentious when it comes to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound? Why are tensions often so high there? Could you just walk our viewers through that a bit?
I think, yes, of course. But I think it's important to understand it's not just the Temple Mount, it's the whole concept of the city itself, the city of Jerusalem. And it's always been politicized from the moment it was founded essentially by David. David chose that site simply because it happened to be convenient, politically convenient to Al-Azm to unite the northern tribes with the southern tribes. If you move up to the time of Islam and after the conquest, obviously, Abdul Malik thought that this would be a good way for him to use the location, use the site to build the Dome of the Rock and to build the that very important sort of monument there as a means to counter his own troubles with Al-Zubair, who was in rebellion against him and had shut him out of Mecca. And then if we move to the more modern period and we consider how the Zionist movement themselves viewed Jerusalem originally, they were very indifferent to it. They were not that attached to it. They did not see it as essential to the foundation of their state. And in fact, many of its most important founders, for example, Herzl would write that he was shocked by the filth. And Ben-Gurion didn't visit it for the first 3 years. And for the most part, it is often, the city, and obviously it's most important, centered around the Temple Mount for obviously for those of the Jewish faith, and for Muslims, it's the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's always been politicized, and it comes into play every time there is, some conflict or issue over the politics of the place.
Nimrod, from your perspective, how should Israeli and Palestinian leaders respond to all of this?
Look, this is probably the hottest spot on earth. The convergence of the three monotheistic religions. And regardless of factual basis in history, I wouldn't dare challenge the faith of others and will not accept others challenging my faith. So we have three of the leading religions in the world considering this as one of their most precious places on the globe. And when we have a moment when the three religions also have three holidays converge, you really have the makings of an explosive situation, as long as there is no political solution that defines what is what and whose is whose. And we have failed in accomplishing that over the past decades. I hope that the next generation of leadership will be wiser than all of us. But at the moment, I think that all leaders all over the place should call for calm and should point out, lash at, and deal fiercely with the extremists who are trying to ignite the situation, given their own exclusive approach to what should be shared.
Ziad, from your perspective, is there a constructive way that Israeli and Palestinian leaders can respond?
Well, of course. I must say that since the year 2002, there was a systematic Israeli policy which gradually started trying to change the situation in Al-Haram al-Sharif and to allow Jews to come to the courtyards of the Haram al-Sharif. And then later in the recent years, they were allowing them to pray and to have religious ceremonies. This policy is actually like playing with a time bomb. I don't agree with Nimrod that it is extremists on both sides. On our side, it's a popular reaction. They are touching on a very sensitive nerve, which is Al-Haram al-Sharif. So the people who were reacting on Friday in the recent days and recent weeks, they were not fanatics, they were not extremists, they were the average Palestinians who are against trying to convert the mosque to become a synagogue or to divide the mosque as they did in Hebron Mosque, in Haram al-Ibrahimi in Hebron. You asked what the leaders can do. I think the leaders should respect the status quo, which was agreed upon since the year 1854-55 during the Ottoman rule. And each religion has control over its sites. When it comes to the Wailing Wall, there is a rule by the court that the Israelis do not have control over the wall itself, but can pray in front of the wall. What happened in 1967 when Israel occupied East Jerusalem, they demolished the whole quarter, which is called Abu Middain quarter. It's a Moroccan neighborhood. It was demolished and it was turned to Esplanda in front of the Wailing Wall. So we in Camp David talks, we agree that the Jews will have control over the Wailing Wall and the area in front of the Wailing Wall, and they can practice the religious ceremonies there. And the Muslims will have control over Al-Haram al-Sharif. What's happening now is that they are trying to take part of Al-Haram al-Sharif. I think it's naive and stupid to think that they can change this situation. They can take part of inside the Haram al-Sharif. They can pray inside the Haram al-Sharif, and the Muslims will sit quiet and welcome these changes. The leaders must try to avoid any friction between Muslims and Jews and should avoid converting this conflict from a national conflict between Palestinians under occupation and Israeli occupation to a conflict between religious fanatics. We should avoid that, and we should not let that. Until now, it is contained. It is a national conflict. It is a political conflict. But there is a change, a massive change within the Israeli society that they are shifting towards the right wing, towards the extremists. And this is now, you can see it in the Knesset, in the parliament.
I'm sorry,
and you can see it also in the government.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I do want to get back to a point you were making in just a moment, but I want to ask Amr about the fact that Ramadan, Passover, and Easter are all converging this year. How much more volatile does that make this situation?
Well, obviously, extremely volatile. I mean, when you have three very, very important religious holidays, ceremonies, events all at the same time, and you have that in a highly politicized situation, because not only are the religious, let's say the location is highly politicized, but you also have extreme tensions associated with these religious sort of ceremonies as well, and the convergence is almost inevitably going to produce the kind of scenes that we've been watching on our TV the last few days. And it's very important that, and again, I repeat, I think the politicization of the religious dimension to this, to the location, to the site, is what is making it so difficult. Jews and Muslims and Christians have managed to share and live side by side for many centuries in different periods. So when they don't, it is generally due to a reason that is associated with politicization, rather than the fact that somehow as humans we're incapable of sharing.
Nimrod, this violence that we're seeing at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, as well as the recent spate of attacks in Israel, how much of a challenge has that been for this very fragile coalition of Prime Minister Bennett's government? How big of a challenge is it for the Prime Minister?
Look, just like on the ground, when extreme elements seize the moment and try to ignite the situation, the same happens in politics. And the opposition, of course, on the right, is all over the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense and the incumbent government, that they are not tough enough on Palestinian challenge for Jewish rights, whereas the government, and here I take issue with my colleagues, where the government was doing everything it could, and I think quite well, with some exceptions that I take issue with, but overall, the strategy was I think, meant to bring calm and to restore the status quo that has been infringed upon in the previous administration here in Israel over the past 3-4 years. The status quo, which basically says that on Haram Sharif, Temple Mount, Muslims pray, others visit. And there were Jewish extremists who were not willing to accept that they cannot pray where Muslims can. And they are still trying to do so. And anyone who echoes their voices that tomorrow morning they're going to establish a synagogue or other nonsense, that tomorrow morning they will do sacrifices of lambs on Temple Mount, it will never happen. But those who echo their threats and their intents are intensifying the tension between the communities. As to political consequences, obviously, we have a new coalition here, about a year old, that has, for the first time ever, an Arab party and an Islamic one at that. They are under tremendous pressure not to stay in the coalition because the government, again, is being accused of being tough on Muslims and not on Jews, which I think is not the case. Will they withstand that pressure? And we will see another day when this quite interesting and refreshing coalition will continue to function. I have no idea.
Ziad, how big does the disconnect remain between Palestinian leadership and Palestinians? And just how frustrated are Palestinians right now with Palestinian leadership?
Well, I must be frank with you. I don't think that the Palestinian leadership has any control over what is happening inside the old city of Jerusalem and what's happening inside the mosque, and not any other political movement, not Hamas, not Jihad, not anyone else. It is a spontaneous reaction of the people. Now, if we want to change this situation, we can say, let's go back to how we were living together, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and there were no frictions, there were no problems. But as I said earlier, they are trying to change the situation. There was a time when there was a court verdict saying that Jews can go to the mosque, but the police will decide if they can go or not, depending on the public order. And all the time, every time, the police said, okay, if we allow the Jews to go to the mosque, there will be disturbing the public order and the public security, so we will not let them to go to the mosque. And this was okay. They were not coming to the mosque and there were no troubles. Now we see the police escorting them, and we see the police trying to evacuate the mosque from the Muslim prayers in order to bring the Israelis to pray inside the yards of the mosque, which are, from an Islamic point of view, they are part of the mosque. Because from our point of view, the mosque is not only the built area, but it's all the courtyards, which we call them masatib and arwiqa around the mosque. All these are one compound, all of these are the mosque. If the Israeli government would stop these fanatics, and look, our problem is not with the Jewish religion. I was talking recently with a rabbi from Yadut HaTorah, and he said to me, I'm against going to the mosque. My religion tells me that I'm not allowed to put my fingers between the stones of the Wailing Wall from the outside of the mosque. This is, and there was for centuries, there was a Jewish halakha not allowing Jews to go to the mosque. Now, these Zionists, they are fanatics, they are nationalists, they are not religious. They claim of themselves as seculars. They're trying to achieve a national goal from going to the mosque. It's not religion in this case. And we should not allow these fanatics, Ben Gvir and Smotrich and all this gang, we should not allow them to dictate the future of the relations between us and the Israelis. There is a very fragile situation. We should try to avoid any clashes, to avoid any bloodshed, and try to seek ways how we can find a breakthrough towards a solution which make us live together side by side. This government is not the government that can do it. And unfortunately, we see that the right wing is all the time having more influence and more power. And they're bringing us to an area where we don't want to be there.
Amr, Jews are forbidden from praying or performing rituals at the compound, but there are ultranationalist groups that want to change this. Why?
I mean, obviously, as you heard, this has everything to do with the effort to attempt to follow, push a ultra-nationalist, exclusivist agenda by certain, members of Israelis or Israeli groups. And they use an extreme, perhaps, or a more fundamentalist interpretation of their own sort of practices to say, I can, by praying here, I've somehow laid claim to something. And I think that's why they're doing it. Now, obviously, there are going to be divided views amongst the Jewish community as to how to address this. There were, we know that, for example, the whole issue, of religious devotion to the city was not regarded as involving any duty or is not connected to regaining sovereignty over it. This was something that was developed later as part of a political ideology and not as part of necessarily a religious doctrinal one. And it's important to separate these two, the doctrinal side from the political ideology side. And I think that's what's missing here.
And Amr, we only have about a minute left, but let me just ask you, are there certain concrete steps that could be taken immediately that could calm the overall situation?
I think, certainly, obviously separating the parties would be a good start by respecting those boundaries. There is an appropriate place for, Jews to go and pray during their holy period, and just as there is a religious place for the Muslims to go and pray in their holy period as well. And ensuring that this separation is maintained, and then try to build some sort of confidence building measures, try to tell both sides that, hey, look, these are the boundaries, and it's important for the civil peace that we maintain these boundaries. And neither side feels that somehow its rights are being attacked or are under threat. And in this case, unfortunately, the threat is coming from the Jewish Israeli side and not the other way around. And I think these would be very constructive ways that the current Israeli government could follow if it wished to sort of ensure that these kinds of events are not repeated. Whether they can, given the political fragility of the coalitions that we see, is another matter.
All right, well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Ziad AbuZayyad, Nimrod Novik, and Amr Al-Azm. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.